The instant my eyes landed on my wife, her shirt hanging open, buttons slipped free, with her boss positioned between her thighs, both of them moving like the rest of reality had been muted around them. That was the exact second I understood our marriage had already taken its last breath. I hadn't shown up to catch her doing anything. I came to make her evening better. I'd brought her favorite takeout and a bottle of wine to quietly celebrate our anniversary, honestly thinking the gesture would light up her face. But the moment I stepped onto the 15th floor, into that strangely still hallway, I caught sight of two bodies woven together in the dim office light. Their clothes were barely clinging to them, their movements urgent and hungry, the kind you can't twist into any innocent explanation. The urgent reports she said she had to finish were scattered across the desk like torn-up pieces of every promise she'd ever made me. My fingers went cold. The dinner in my hands felt heavy and useless. And just like that, in one brutal, silent heartbeat, the version of my life I believed in simply ceased to exist. If you're still reading, pay close attention now, because that moment wasn't even the part that cut the deepest. Not by a long shot. I didn't touch the office door. I didn't confront anyone. I just turned away and headed back toward the elevator, as if my body already understood there was nothing up there worth holding onto. The hallway was so soundless I could hear my pulse thudding in my ears. My hand trembled when I lifted it to press the elevator button, but as soon as the doors slid shut, the shaking faded. Something else clicked into place, something colder, clearer. I stared at the reflection staring back at me from the brushed metal wall. Same face, same worn-out eyes, the same man who'd brought his wife dinner because she claimed she'd be trapped at work late into the night. But that version of me, he disappeared. It felt like he collapsed into dust before the elevator even reached the lobby. I work as a project manager. My entire professional world is built on sequences, inconsistencies, missing data, and final outcomes. And when you analyzed patterns long enough, you eventually recognize when the numbers stop making sense. By the time the elevator reached the ground floor, I had made one quiet, steady choice. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't stage some desperate confrontation. That would have been the old me. The version that died somewhere between floors 14 and 1. The new me would do something else entirely. Watch carefully, collect what matters, and let the consequences fall exactly where they were meant to. The morning after, the world acted as if the previous night had never existed. At 6:15, the coffee maker sputtered to life, right on schedule, same kitchen lights, same counter, and the same old mug warming my palm. Vanessa stepped in looking like she'd been styled for a magazine shoot. Her hair was arranged with surgical precision, her makeup sharp enough to cut. She wore a blouse I had never seen before, a pale cream shade that seemed chosen to make her complexion look polished, almost luxurious. And there was more perfume than usual, the sort of change you only register when your mind has begun cataloging every deviation. She filled the stainless steel travel mug, the one I'd wrapped for her at Christmas, with practiced motions, never once glancing in my direction. A flat, routine line came out of her mouth. I'll probably be late again tonight. Busy week. I tasted my coffee, studying the way her eyes dodged mine, and asked, "Big presentation today?" For the briefest moment she froze, just a flicker, before answering, "Bradley wants the quarterly reports revised." You know how particular he is. Bradley, the same man who, less than 12 hours earlier, had been positioned between her legs. She bent down, pressed a quick kiss to my cheek with the precision of someone punching a timecard, grabbed her bag, and headed out the door. On the surface, everything mimicked normalcy. But beneath that thin layer, the structure had already fractured. And once you recognize a fracture in the pattern, you can't unsee it, and you never return to the way things were. I didn't trail behind her. There was no need to. People who lie fall into familiar cycles, and those cycles eventually expose the very person who built them. So I started assembling the picture piece by piece. I went through her calendar. Those late meetings lined up almost perfectly with the days. Bradley flew back from his trips. The evenings when she came home, drained, heading straight into the shower without a word, followed their own specific cadence as well. Then I dug further, not because I wanted to punish myself, but because once the truth steps into the light, you can't push it back into the dark. Footage from the entrance camera. Her banking records. Emails she deleted, but not permanently, since she had no idea I'd set up automatic backups. And here's the part that cut deeper than the betrayal itself. The thing that truly finished me was realizing that she had never shown that level of happiness with me as she did with him in those clips. No hesitation, no discomfort, only open, unfiltered hunger. And I wasn't flawless, I never pretended to be. I got worn out, forgot small things, shut down emotionally at times. But I was steady, loyal, devoted. I honestly believed that would matter. For the next week, I moved through life like I was wrapped in fog. I said everything I was supposed to say, did everything I was supposed to do. She was convinced I was oblivious. And then one morning she slipped. A tiny misstep, almost meaningless outwardly, but it shifted everything. She came out of the shower with a towel wrapped around her and set her phone on the dresser. The screen lit up. Looking forward to tonight. Last time wasn't enough. I didn't react, didn't reach for it, just stared at the message and felt whatever warmth I had in me ice over completely. She went to the closet, started getting dressed, totally unaware that the version of our life she thought existed, just like the version I had lived in, was no longer real. When she finally turned toward me, I smiled. Not because I wanted to pretend, but because something inside me snapped into a different gear. Observer right pointing arrow architect. I was done standing on the sidelines of my own life. That's the moment I started drawing up a plan. I didn't reveal what I knew. Direct confrontation only fuels a liar. It hands them the opportunity to reshape the narrative, to cry on command, to deflect, to bargain, to twist everything around. No, confrontation belongs to those who still hope to repair something. And I had already stepped past that line. Instead, I began creating duplicates of every piece of evidence. Screenshots, account records, photos of papers she thought were safely hidden away. A chronological map so precise there was no room left for uncertainty. The more material I collected, the steadier I became. This wasn't disorder. It was structure. My first objective was simple: to gauge the full extent of the deception. And it reached much further than I had expected. Her so-called trainings, hotel rooms, her corporate obligations, dinner dates at places she insisted she didn't enjoy, the bouquets she claimed she won at the office, gifts from him. I wasn't sure which hurt more, the lying itself, or how effortlessly she maintained two separate realities. But there was one detail that sliced deeper than the rest. She spoke about me with him. Not with friends, not in private notes, with him. And it wasn't just talking. She laughed. She laughed that I was too serious. She laughed that I never catch signals. She laughed that I treat marriage like a job. That laughter hit harder than the betrayal. And still, I said nothing. No accusations. No drama. I kept gathering and planning. The plan was straightforward and flawless. I would let her dismantle her own world with her own decisions. And the opportunity arrived earlier than I anticipated. One evening, when she came home, exhausted, I noticed a faint mark on her neck, the kind only I used to leave. She hadn't bothered to cover it because she was rushing, because she was certain I was oblivious. I acted as though I hadn't seen it, smiled, asked about her day, and that very night, I completed the final piece of preparation. I set the date that would bring everything to an end, and I arranged it so quietly she didn't sense a thing. The day when every element finally clicked into place happened to fall on a Thursday. She brushed a quick kiss across my forehead, mentioned she would probably get home late again, and rushed out the door in a dress I had never seen her wear before. It was elegant in a way that didn't match office wear, too polished, too deliberately selected. It wasn't just clothing, it was a message, or rather, the last confirmation of what had already become obvious. I let her walk out without a word, waited about 10 minutes, then left the house myself. I wasn't heading to work. My destination had nothing to do with my job. I wanted to witness the truth with my own eyes one final time, so there would be no space for doubt, excuses, or wishful thinking. I already knew the routine they followed. I knew the places where they preferred to meet, the restaurant they usually chose for their dinners, and the spot they used when they needed privacy during breaks. There was no need to chase her car. I had already charted out their schedule almost to the minute. The only thing missing was the last, undeniable verification. I drove to the same hotel, the one they always referred to as their business retreat location. A flawless disguise. I parked and stayed in the car, my eyes fixed on the entrance. There was no tension running through me. No rage building inside. Not even the kind of shaking you get before a confrontation. What settled over me was something else entirely. The stillness of a person who had already survived the worst moment and was now simply completing the final logical step. At exactly 7:42 p.m., she showed up. Just like every previous instance. The same pattern repeated itself. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her hair, checked her appearance in the side window, and smiled. A smile she hadn't shown me in months. Then, at 7:46, he appeared. Wearing a business suit, phone in his hand, with that familiar expression on his face. The same one I had seen in the recordings. They entered the building together. He rested his hand on her lower back, natural, confident. She didn't pull away. If anything, she subtly leaned into the gesture. I didn't trail after them. I didn't need to. I didn't want to witness anymore. Every necessary detail was already in my possession. What happened there was simply the final verification, the last tile that locked the entire mosaic into place. Sitting inside my car, one single emotion settled in. I finally had the right to disengage from everything. The right to walk away. The right to rebuild my life without deception weighing on every moment. I didn't return home immediately. Instead, I drove to meet with the lawyer I had selected a week earlier, right around the time it became obvious where all of this was heading. We sat down in his office. He listened silently as I explained. I passed him the full collection of evidence I had prepared. He looked through it, then nodded and said, "You have an airtight case. You'll get through this cleanly and with your integrity intact." And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt something loosen inside me. Not joy, not any feeling of victory. Just relief. Because once the truth finally lands, even when it tears everything apart, it gives you a kind of freedom nothing else can. The divorce unfolded in a way that felt far more clinical than I had anticipated. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't emotional. It was simply procedural. Two people dismantling a shared existence the same way auditors break down numbers on a financial report. We sat across from each other at a long conference table. Her attorney on one side, mine on the other. Stacks of papers, organized binders, highlighted documents laid neatly between us. Not a single raised voice. Not a single accusation. No, why did you do this? No, could we have saved it? She didn't lift her eyes toward me. And I didn't make any attempt to meet hers. There was an entire collapsed history sitting between us. A history neither of us could repair or even pretend to reach for anymore. When she placed her signature on the final document, her hand shook just slightly. Not with fear of losing something valuable, but with the quiet discomfort of a person forced to confront the outcome of choices they thought they could outrun. Once the last page was signed, she spoke, barely audible. "I didn't want it to end this way." I gave a small nod. Not because I shared the sentiment, but because I no longer had the energy to explain anything to her, nor the desire to revisit a past that had already shut its doors. We left the building in silence. She turned to the right. I walked to the left. That single moment, stepping away from each other, literally, felt like the most accurate representation of everything that had led us here. The first night after the divorce, I stayed alone in the apartment that no longer belonged to us, only to me. The closets remained empty. Her perfume no longer lingered in the air. The silence felt unfamiliar, yet strangely peaceful. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat on the floor in the center of the living room. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no tightness in my chest, no underlying anxiety, no feeling that I needed to decode what I had supposedly done wrong. And unexpectedly, there was no hatred. Just a muted, slightly bitter regret for the version of our life that might have existed if either of us had been honest long before things collapsed. A week after the divorce was finalized, she sent me a message. "Can we talk?" I looked at that text for a long time. It could have been minutes or it could have been an eternity. It felt like both. There was no anger inside me. No curiosity. No desire to revisit a chapter that had already been sealed. So I typed back a short answer. "I think everything that needed to be said has already been said." She never responded, and I assumed that was the final page of this story. I was wrong. 3 months after the divorce, she appeared at the door of my new apartment. No call beforehand, no text, just a firm knock at exactly 9:17 p.m. I wasn't expecting her, not even remotely. By then, my life had begun to take on a new order. A different living space, different habits, different mornings. The quiet no longer felt like a threat. It felt like something that finally belonged to me. When I opened the door, she stood there wearing the same coat I had once given her, the fabric familiar but out of place in my doorway. Her eyes were swollen, the kind of red that comes from crying long before walking up several flights of stairs. She said just one word. Please. I moved aside and let her come in. Not out of longing, not out of hope, but because sometimes hearing someone out is the final step in closing the last page of your own story. She looked around. Everything in the apartment was different from the space we had shared together. No sentimental decorations, more open light, no clutter. Every object had been chosen by me. Everything here was mine and mine alone. She sat down on the edge of the couch, hands intertwined as if she was trying to keep them steady. I messed up. Badly, she began. I stayed quiet. I wasn't going to guide her through it or soften the moment. If she had something to say, she needed to say it directly. I thought I knew what I needed, she continued. I thought I lacked attention, emotions, something new. But when everything collapsed, I understood something I should have realized much earlier. Everything I was chasing wasn't real. And in the process, I destroyed the only thing that actually gave me stability. She finally lifted her gaze toward mine. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I know I broke your trust. I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry. Genuinely sorry. Her voice wavered, not in a manipulative way, not like before, but like someone who had run out of places to hide from their own truth. I sat across from her. Only a few feet separated us physically, but in reality, the distance between who we were then and who we had become now was enormous. I don't hate you, I said. And it was true. But we can't return to what we used to be. We aren't those versions of ourselves anymore. And that marriage, it no longer exists. She pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. I know. I wanted you to hear it directly from me. We talked for maybe 10 more minutes. Calmly. Without confrontation, without raising old wounds. And for the first time in years, her words sounded honest. It didn't feel like reconciliation. It felt like the final closure we never had. Before leaving, she said quietly, I'm glad you didn't fall apart. You deserve a much better life than the one we built. Then she stepped out. I closed the door behind her, and for a moment I leaned my forehead against it, not out of grief, but because I felt the weight of the last unresolved chapter finally lifting. I believed that was the conclusion of it all. But life has a way of leaving a few lines unfinished. 2 weeks after everything collapsed, I crossed paths with someone new. It wasn't dramatic, nothing cinematic. No sudden spark or instant connection. It was simply quiet, human, steady. It happened completely by accident. A cup of coffee in my hand, rain tapping against the windows, a line that was moving at a painfully slow pace. She stood just ahead of me, a book resting between her fingers, and when my umbrella brushed her arm, she looked back and smiled. Not a fan of long lines either? She teased lightly. I replied, only when I'm standing in them without caffeine. We both laughed. It was small, effortless, and uncomplicated, nothing that demanded explanations or required me to drag pieces of my old life into the moment. We chatted for a few minutes, about the rain, the coffee, the story she was reading. It all felt so natural that I suddenly noticed something surprising. For the first time in months, there was no tightness in my chest. We exchanged numbers. No tension, no implications. Just a simple, mutual decision. Her name was Alina. The next day, she sent a message. I found this tiny coffee place I think you'll love. Want to go together? And I agreed. Not out of politeness. Not to distract myself. But because, for the first time in a long time, I genuinely wanted to take a step forward. Our first outing felt incredibly easy. We sat at a window table, watching the soft drizzle coat the street, talking as if we were old acquaintances catching up after years apart. She didn't pry, didn't push, didn't try to extract pieces of my past or force any confessions out of me. She simply existed in the moment. Present, authentic, calm. You look like someone who's been through a lot, she said softly, but didn't let any of it destroy you. And for the first time in a long while, warmth replaced the emptiness I had grown used to. It felt like being seen, not for my wounds, but for who I had become in spite of them. We began meeting regularly. No rushing toward anything. No labels or expectations. Just two people sharing moments that felt gentle and uncomplicated. One afternoon she told me, you deserve someone who's honest with you. Completely honest. And in that instant I understood. Honesty was the thing I had been starved for without even realizing it. Not perfection. Not dramatic promises. But steady, consistent truth. When my ex-wife eventually learned I was seeing someone new, she sent me a message. No accusations. No emotional outbursts. Just a single sentence. I hope she treats you better than I treated you. I read it more than once, not because the meaning confused me, but because there was a level of honesty in that line she had never allowed herself to say before. My reply was simple. Thank you. And I genuinely hope you find what you truly need. Those weren't polite phrases or empty pleasantries. It was the truth. We had each walked through our own storms, difficult, draining, but necessary. And now we stood in different lives, each with a chance to start over. Alina never asked me to compare her to anyone. She never tried to pull answers about my past out of me, and she never expected me to use her to patch up old wounds. She accepted me exactly as I was, with scars, history, and the quiet questions I didn't always know how to explain. And that, unexpectedly, became the thing that surprised me most. How simple closeness feels when there's no deception attached to it. One evening, as we sat on the balcony sipping tea, Alina leaned toward me and said softly, "You don't strike me as someone who wants chaos. You look like someone who values stability. And honestly, you're right to want that." I smiled, not because she was praising me, but because every word she said was true. My past didn't vanish. It left marks, but they no longer stung. They simply reminded me how far I'd traveled from the version of myself who once felt completely shattered. Over time, I caught myself noticing that I was waking up not with emptiness, but with a quiet sense of gratitude for the way life slowly pieces itself back together. Not instantly, not painlessly, but truthfully. And at some point, it hit me. This wasn't a story about betrayal anymore. It had become a story about healing, about dignity, about learning that everyone deserves a second chance, just not necessarily with the same person. If there's one conclusion I've drawn from everything that happened, it's this: closure never arrives from the person who caused the damage. It appears only at the moment you finally make a choice in favor of yourself, rather than in favor of the pain they left in you. We often end up waiting for someone to return, to provide explanations, to offer an apology, to somehow mend the wounds they created. But the truth is both blunt and undeniable. They are incapable of repairing what they shattered. The only ones who can complete that healing process are we ourselves. At some point I stopped expecting answers. I stopped turning the same questions over in my mind. Why? I stopped trying to impose logic on something that never had any to begin with. I simply chose to continue my life. Not flawlessly, not without missteps, but with sincerity. And within that shift, I discovered a kind of freedom I never knew existed. My days grew steadier, lighter, more grounded. I allowed myself to trust again, slowly, with caution, yet genuinely. I stopped being afraid of quiet moments. Stopped being afraid of closeness. Stopped dragging old injuries into situations that had nothing to do with them. Alina once said to me, "You don't need to be ideal. Being real is enough." And that might be one of the most meaningful things anyone has ever told me. I have no way of knowing where life will take us next, no one does. But one thing is clear to me: I remained honest with myself. And I reached something that once seemed unattainable: peace. Not forgetting, not returning to the past, not seeking payback, just peace. And if my story serves someone, as reassurance, a reminder, or support, let it deliver this message. You will get through it. You will rebuild yourself. And one day you'll open your eyes in the morning, and the pain will be gone. Not because someone came back or finally clarified their actions, but because you learned to choose yourself. And that choice is the strongest one a person can make.